The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here on a Friday night. I want to thank everybody in my chat room for faithfully supporting the show, for sharing information. I get message after message on multiple different channels every day, people that are seeing the TV shows that are playing all over the world. They're reaching out to me. I've got 2 new TV shows that I will be in starting this January, which will be great. I also have something else in the works, so I will keep you posted on that. And it's good to have the opportunity to get information out there instead of a lot of stuff that we're seeing in the UFO community, which is absolute garbage. I just have to say that. I want to, before I bring my amazing guest on tonight, talk a little bit about what has happened in the past week to me, because this highlights some of the ineptness in the UFO community and also the underhandedness. I have, for the past few years, been locating and collecting different things from researchers who have passed away. I have over 600 rare out-of-print books, magazines, periodicals. They're all in a commercial space that I have dedicated for learning about the UFO phenomenon. This is something that I am very passionate about, and as you know, I've had people like Jan Aldrich and Barry Greenwood on my show numerous times to teach the public the importance of preserving history. I have been working on for years trying to locate and collect files from Utah, which is my stomping ground. Elaine Douglas was the former state MUFON director before I took over. She passed away and left a lot of files that could have helped Utah, could have furthered research and given us more information to work with. I've been trying to obtain those files, and I was very hopeful because Marilyn Carlson, who owned the files, had given me permission to come to Oklahoma. She told me to come to Oklahoma and get the files. I obtained funding to do that from someone who was very prominent in the research field, and I was informed by Ms. Carlson that the executive director of MUFON, Jan Harzan, had stepped in and was now going to take all of the files. To me, this is not only unethical, but this is just absolutely immoral behavior. This degrades what we have been trying to do to preserve history. It also is a very deliberate attempt by MUFON leadership to suppress information. They are very concerned, specifically probably Jan Harzan, about Elaine's files because Elaine, after 25 years of dedicated service to MUFON, she tried to reform MUFON and also began investigating some of the tax returns, some of the cases that were missing, some of the ways that people were being mistreated in the organization, and she had files on people. The interesting thing here is I told specifically Ms. Carlson, I volunteered this, that I would not go forward with anything that would implicate anyone in MUFON. And I meant that because I care about a lot of people in the organization. And at the end of the day, I want the organization to succeed, but not under current leadership. Now with this type of behavior and suppression of evidence and just really destroying history of the subject here in Utah, I think that there deserves to be a lot more that we're going to be looking into. And it's not just me. It is a whole list of other people that will be looking into this. Non-for-profits have specific guidelines, both federal and state guidelines. I have been speaking with people in the legal profession about these guidelines, and it'll be interesting to see what unfolds in the coming months with regard to this. So even though I don't have access to Elaine's work, I will continue what she started. I also want to say that next week, when I would have been going out to pick up the files in Oklahoma, I've decided to bring on different people who knew Elaine to honor her work, to honor her memory. And I look forward to that. So please share this, get this out here, and I look forward to that. But without further ado, I want to talk about my guest this evening. I've been hoping for a long time that he would be on the show, and this is a coup for me. I can't believe it. Richard Thieme is a pioneer. And when I listen to him speak, and you can watch his videos on YouTube where he's speaking at DEF CON, he has so much information to say about a lot of different subjects. In the 80s and 90s, he illuminated how society, identity, and intelligence and security work would change as new information and communication technologies reshaped the substance of relationships and ourselves. Now he is called a prophet who saw it all from the beginning, but back then he was called a crazy. As a result of speaking at many global conferences and reaching more on YouTube, 5 books in the past 12 years, he has built a reputation for far-seeing insights, a powerful, articulate speaker, speaking ability, and audiences that range from the NSA and the FBI to 23 straight years at DEF CON. He is one of those people that I've listened to his talks for a long, long time. I have a book right here that he wrote, helped write UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry. I have been fortunate to have Robert Powell, Klaus Vaughn, Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich on my show, who all contributed to this book. And now Richard, I thank you. I am so stoked to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, absolutely.
Although it's hard to recognize myself from that intro because I'm just the same guy I've always been. I'm just curious about stuff. That's really what it comes down to. You just want to know stuff, right?
Well, you do, and you really do have an eloquent way of speaking, and you clearly grab your audience and you give them information that is, to me, important. And I love the fact that tonight we're going to be talking about not only UFOs and government secrecy, disinformation, misinformation, but just, hacking and some of these things. All of this intertwines. And so, and I want to know, because I'm very curious, you and I had a conversation, and I'm not sure if this was maybe a little bit over a year ago, and you had told me that you spent some time living in Utah. And I would love to start, if you could just give us a little information about your time here in Utah and what you were doing.
Well, actually, I was just in Provo, Utah a few weeks ago. I did a keynote for a conference called SaintCon, which is appropriate, right? The LDS Saints. And it was a terrific conference. It felt like going home. When I first went to Utah, it was a brand new world, a very different culture. I had only lived at that time in London, Madrid, and Chicago. So to move to Mutton Hollow between Kaysville and Layton in Davis County was a bit of a challenge, especially since I went there as an Episcopal clergyman. I had recently been ordained as an Episcopal priest, and I did that work in parishes for 16 years, and Utah was the first place I went. Now, that was on the edge of Hill Air Force Base, and I was there 2 years and then moved down to St. James Episcopal Church in near Cottonwood, near Sandy, for 5 years. And being an Episcopal clergyman gave you the necessity of interacting with the culture in a way that helped you understand it, because you were a minority. You were part of what we called the Gentile ghetto in those days. It's changed quite a bit. But relevant to our conversation here, it was at Hill Air Force Base that I had people in the parish who were from the base, and the senior warden or major lay administrator of the parish, Bob Reed, was at that time, I believe, a major. I believe he retired as a full bird colonel and went into information security work when he retired, but he was a fighter pilot, and he had been decorated heavily because of his genuinely heroic actions in Vietnam. He was a hell of a guy, kind of guy you really trusted and would trust in combat with your life. And we were sitting in the church basement in Clearfield, Utah, one night, just the two of us, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind was just playing in the movie theater in Ogden. And so that would have been 40 years ago in 1978. And I had read a lot about UFOs. I'd read Hynek and Vallée and you know, the usual suspects. And I said to him, Bob, you know, these guys claim that you chase these things in your fastest fighters and you can't catch them. And Bob usually looked pretty cocky, but he looked perplexed when he replied. And he said, well, that's right. He said, we chase the damn things and we can't catch them. And that was important for me because it was what I call a contextual shift. UFOs are cool. The whole subject is cool. The narratives are exotic, often extreme, often fanciful. But the whole subject for many decades has just been something that gets a real tingle out of you when you explore it. It's almost like campfire stories where you're talking about the rap in the night. But this was the first time someone I knew well, trusted, and had confidence in, confirmed the simple factuality of the physical nature of a UFO, that his colleagues chased them in their fastest fighters, and the UFOs took evasive action, as we learned back in the 1940s. They did when we pursued them, and when radar pinged on them, which told us these were not objects that happened to happen. They were intelligent and responsive, and either remotely piloted or piloted by live sentient creatures. And so that was an important thing. Utah was a very important formative time in my life. I came to love it, going back to Provo, really to embrace what the culture manifests. People, you know, we just saw the Book of Mormon not long ago, and it's easy to satirize. But the fact is that the higher level calling, which the LDS culture can manifest, was evident in that Information Security Conference in SaintCon. These were great people, and there's an ethos not always adhered to, like all ethos that we try to live up to, but it permeated the conference. So it was really great to go back and revisit, although it's changed, as you know, dramatically. From Ogden all the way to Provo is one big city, and from the Wasatch Front all the way to the Oakers, it's like flying into LA and seeing nothing but development. So it's a big city with a lot going on. And I've often said if I had to move somewhere else besides the Midwest, I would probably move to Salt Lake City. So that's my Utah story.
I love it. And you knew Father Walt.
Yes,
we talked about that, and Father Walt was, I went to Roland Hall St. Mark's, and so I knew Father Walt, and he was one of the kindest, most gentle human beings that I've ever met.
He was a good guy. It brought forth the best of us as Episcopal clergymen, and as Episcopal lay men and women as well, because most of them, when they moved to Utah, had never lived as a minority in any way before. And they had never experienced what minorities experience. So it was a time of self-examination and questioning that often brought forth the most authentic spirituality that they could discover in order to ask the question, why am I who I am and what I am, and then answer it from a depth that had previously never had to be fathomed. So, yeah, we share some good experiences, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to say, I've had, before a couple times actually on my show, Mark Iriarte, who was stationed out at Hill Air Force Base, and I think he might have been there when you were there, which is interesting. And so I don't know if you ever does that name sound familiar? Have you ever?
No, it doesn't. The only ones I knew were people in the parish. I could visit Hill, but not penetrate it. It was the occasion of, I understand why people are awe-inspired when they see a UFO, their mouths hanging agape, because I had experience like that driving to work one day along the mountain road, and as I came over to where the parish was in Clearfield, near Highway 15, I just had a sensation that there was something immense above me, and I pulled over to the side of the road and got out and looked up, and it was a 747 with the space shuttle on its back coming right over me for a final approach to Hill Air Force Base.
Oh, wow.
And I was in awe. The immensity of that, the technology it manifested, gave me at least a clue of what it must be like for someone to be in the presence of a technology that is obviously far superior to what we have manifested or generated so far. And that was right there near the Wasatch, near Francis Peak in Davis County.
Oh, that is amazing. Thank you for sharing your Utah stories. That means a lot to me. And so I have to ask you, when having a strong religious background and faith, how do you view UFOs, the whole topic? I mean, I see in the UFO community a lot of people who think that this is demonic, and I think that is not necessarily a road to go down. But what are your feelings?
No, I would say with a chuckle, no, that's not a good road to go down. Sometimes you encounter, I'm going to go out on a limb here and use a phrase that will irritate some people, but in ethical and moral philosophy, there's a category of thinking that designates someone who is so inured to facts and to the intrusion of reality onto their belief system that they manifest what is called in moral philosophy invincible ignorance. Invincible ignorance. It means you are so deeply inside your not knowing that you don't even know how to not know, or how to begin knowing in a legitimate way, in an authentic way, how to pursue facts, including facts about anomalies and mysteries and challenging experiences. And sometimes religious people who have accepted, called a worldview or a mythology, which was formulated thousands of years ago about demons, have not moved forward in their thinking in terms of understanding what a demonic presence really might be. We're talking about evil. We're talking about people who do evil things. We're not talking about demonic presences that kind of float around us and are looking for ways to subvert human beings. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for how we subvert ourselves, not how something external to us subverts us. Let me give you an example. I did a word study of the word enemy in scriptures many years ago. And through the old scriptures, the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, the enemy usually designated somebody external to yourself who was attacking you. So we were the tribe and they were the external enemy. But around the time of Jesus, and rabbis said this too, it changed. And the enemy was that within ourselves which resisted truth, wholeness, redemption, call it what you will, but it was inside. It was in us. And therefore, the fight had to be with ourselves and that which obstructed our search for truth and wholeness. And so you don't want to confuse metaphors, which demons were, metaphors for internal proclivities toward evil by human beings, for entities which, how in the world would they have anything to do with UFOs any more than with a truck? We don't say trucks or RVs or SUVs are demonic. Although you might say SUVs or all the trucks I have to park around are demonic. But that's not what's meant. I mean,
right.
A vehicle, whether piloted by somebody from this planet or from another planet, from this space-time or from another space-time, really has nothing more or less to do with demonic influence than anything else. So that's just plain silly. So having a spiritual a background in religiosity also means you have to grow in your understanding of what religious statements mean and how they mean it, and get clear about how to integrate what you feel and think with the realities that you accept just straight up as the factual basis for your beliefs and your thinking about your life. They have to be integrated. They have to be congruent. And so you can't have one mythology in one part of your head and compartmentalize it and then talk about scientific reality with another part of your head as if you can live with those two contradictory systems. You have to understand the first one as metaphorical, as meaningful. Metaphors are profoundly meaningful. They're the most meaningful things we can articulate. So it's not putting something down or denigrating it to say it's a metaphor, but you understand it as a metaphor on behalf of meaning something toward which it points. And science happens to be full of metaphors. The scientific thinking, when you really look at it, is so full of metaphorical avenues toward truth that we ignore the fact that they are metaphors. Quick example, people are looking at ion exchanges, talk about channels. Well, as soon as you call it a channel, you think of like a canal or a passage or a tube. But really, there's no physical evidence that there's a, quote, channel, unquote. But once everybody talks about ion exchange through channels, then the metaphor imposes a way of thinking and framing reality onto the phenomena.
Okay, and I've got to whip.
And you got to stop.
I know it. Yep. Dang it. We will talk about that when we get back. I'm Erica Lukes here with Richard Thieme, and you can go to themeworks.com to learn more. We will be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hello, this is Solaris Blue Raven, host of Hyperspace, exclusively here at KCOR Digital Radio Network, wishing you and your loved ones a very Merry Christmas, stellar solstice, and a magical New Year. Blessed be.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code code radio10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Here's what happened on the last episode of Three Guys, No Ties.
Close. I don't know what's more dumbass, him losing his license or that this was on the front page of a major news outlet.
It's a huge story, and of course we're going to cover it here on Three Guys No Ties.
It's not, but it looks ridiculous, and so you want to look. You clicked on it, right? We got it, don't we? I saw the same thing. As soon as I saw it on your computer screen, I wanted to see what that story was. So it's even newspapers are doing clickbait.
Three Guys, No Ties. Wednesday nights, 7 to 9 Pacific on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring. Why?
Anyone?
Because they were huddled around the fire, listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network, home for the holiday special. Brilliant! Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, Christmas Eve, it's commercial-free holiday music.
Yes, this Christmas music. It's joyful and triumphant.
Our gift to you from the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Thursday nights are about to get weird on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Join hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz as they go exploring the bizarre. Jet across the cosmos with two of the most electrifying paranormal researchers in the known universe. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Exploring the bizarre takes you deep within the world of the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology. It's time to take back the night with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. Exploring the bizarre. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Only on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I am happy to be here, and as always, I'm just thrilled to see my friends in chat. Make sure that you get information out about the show. Spread the word. I truly do a lot of research on this topic, and I mean, in fact, I think I do more research on this topic than I do actually running a business, which I spend a lot of time at, but I'm so passionate about what I do and preserving history and making sure that good information is getting out, because as we know, this community is just kind of full of it and delusional, and we'll talk about that with my guest this evening. But I learned about Richard Thieme a few years ago. I have been a big fan of his because I think he has a lot of important information, not just about UFOs, but spirituality. And he is a big wig at DEF CON. He's spoken there for 23 years. He lectures internationally. He's going to Amsterdam. And also one of my favorite books, UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry. He helped contribute to that book along with my friends Barry Greenwood and Jan Aldrich. So it is a pleasure to have you on the show, Richard. Thank you so much for being here. And so let's just really quickly finish where we left off before the break, and then I want to get into a little bit about ufology and misinformation and disinformation.
Okay, let me slide into that by saying I know that when you use the word ignorance, you can trigger people who don't want to feel like they're ignorant. But I want to go back to that, because until we recognize that of which we are ignorant, we cannot begin to learn. And you mentioned Barry Greenwood and Robert Powell and Jan Aldrich and add Mike Swords and the others. When I was invited to participate in that project that created UFOs in Government, a historical inquiry, I want to be really clear about that. I am usually, in most of the work I do, I am usually the most ignorant person in the room. And in technology, I have always been a DEF CON, which grew in the time I've spoken there from 300 to 27,500. I am always the most ignorant person in the room. It means everybody else around me knows more than I do, which is why I keep learning every time I go to a conference. And that was certainly true. Let me tell you what Mike Swords did for me. Mike Swords was the chief writer. He and Robert Powell were the real keys to that book. And I take no credit for the extraordinary work that they did. I was invited to a meeting where they decided that a book is what was necessary, not just white papers, in order to address the need for a factual basis for the history. And we chose history as an avenue because it can be documented. And so I once wrote to Mark Rodiger at CUFOS, and I had a whole bunch of questions, and Mike Swords was involved in it too. And Mike Swords took the time to come from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Chicago and spent an entire weekend, in effect, tutoring and mentoring me, giving me a private seminar to bring me up to speed. Because, as he laughingly said to Mark in that meeting, and Bill Murphy was there, Linda Murphy was there, others were there, he said, Richard wants to know what we know, because he's read all this stuff for all these decades, and he studied it and he's thought about it in a sane way, but he wants to know what he's missing. And the bottom line was, if you approach the subject with a clear awareness of how much you don't know, you're not missing much of what you can know about it. And there's a big distinction between what you can know and that about which you can speculate. And one of the reasons the book is now in over 100 academic libraries is because there's no speculation in it. There are 1,000 footnotes. Barry, you're talking about amassing material. Barry Greenwood has about 250,000 clippings, which over half a century he has amassed. And the nuance and intelligence and judgment which everyone else on that team brought to this topic and the subject is where I have learned as much as I can learn. In their presence, I just feel privileged and honored to keep being challenged and stimulated to listen to them and integrate and articulate what I've integrated. And let me give you one example of the difference. I was once invited up to the middle of Wisconsin, I think it was Wisconsin Rapids, from Milwaukee, because a woman claimed she had been contacted by UFOs, and she had experiences she wanted to discuss, and I drove up there, and we sat on her back porch and talked about it. And one of the incidents she disclosed was being in her bedroom at night and receiving what she understood to be a telepathic communication to go down the road to a clearing where she would be picked up by a ship. So she found herself, in response, kind of running down the road at night, barefoot in her nightgown, toward this clearing to meet this UFO craft. And an automobile came around the curve, and the headlights flashed in her eyes and kind of woke her up to what she was doing. And she said, "What in the world am I doing?" And she turned around and went back to her home. I told this story to David Jacobs, and he stopped me at that point, and he said, "That was not an automobile. Those were not headlights. That was a UFO, and her belief that that's what happened is a screen memory implanted by aliens." Okay, at that point, you just don't know where to turn, because here's someone considered a guru of abduction phenomena who has a complete understanding of what happened during an incident of which he was completely ignorant.
Yep.
It's called eisegesis in biblical studies, where you think you know the pattern and you impose it on the data and the narrative instead of letting the data speak to you. He had no way of explaining that event other than through Occam's razor as exactly what she said it was, an automobile coming around a curve. But he has a narrative which has so deeply imprisoned him that he can't get out of normalcy turned into those exotic narratives, which fits the belief that the entire planet is going to turn into a hybrid of aliens and human beings within a certain number of years. In the Zen story, the professor went to the monk and said, "I need you to teach me." And the monk said, "First, here's a cup of tea." And the professor held the cup, and the monk poured tea into it. But when it reached the top, he kept pouring, and it was spilling over onto the floor. And the professor said, "Wait a minute, the cup is full." And the monk said, "And so are you. And if you want to learn, you must first empty your cup."
I like that.
So in order to make any headway in a domain that, as you said, is full of disinformation, misinformation, and narratives that seize our psyches almost as powerfully as religious narratives themselves, which is why they persist for so long. It takes real rigor, real discipline, and collegiality, which is why I turned to these really terrific people. I kept escalating my game to learn from the best, because you can't do it alone. And to be engaged in a serious scholarly conversation with people who know so much more than you do, out of your mutual respect for one another, is a great gift. So ignorance is not bad. It's a great thing to suddenly have that sinking feeling and realize, oh my God, I thought I knew and I didn't. And then begin the exploration of finding out what's real.
And I love that. And I feel blessed because I've worked really hard, but I have found people like Barry and Jan to mentor me, and I get to learn from them, and it's an honor. And I will always want to do the best that I can to carry their work forward and to get good information out there, because I, go to conferences, or I look at some of the people that when I first came into this subject publicly that I might have had respect for, and now I just sit back and think, whoa, you're delusional, you have a really warped ego, and it's just this. It is such, the whole field of ufology is really warped, and I think that isn't, for somebody who cares about witnesses, who cares about the subject, I think it's a disservice to see this kind of behavior.
Well, I agree completely. I think you're absolutely right. And the challenge as a result of what you described is, okay, how do we stay steady? How do we not become obsessive about it? But how do we stay true to the importance of understanding what this phenomena really does mean? Because you can't get very seriously and deeply into the subject without coming to the conclusion that there are alternative realities that people hold as true, and alternative histories. And one history includes contact with non-human intelligence, however you want to frame that. And what has happened from that moment on, when we became aware that that's what was happening, that's one historical record. And to pretend it didn't happen and doesn't happen is a different historical record. And one of the things that was astonishing after World War II was to take a look at the direction which some Nazi science had gone. Some was good, but some was crazy. And it took only 33 to 45, only 12 years of the Third Reich to veer off into a radically different alternative direction in how they framed history and how they did science, with profound implications for where it would have gone in the future had that trajectory continued. And so there are a multiplicity of historical narratives in our heads, and we have to go back to the basics first. But where the basics then lead us is to all of the big questions. I know some people still ask me, do I think there's life on other planets? I watched a wonderful little video on the internet called Laniakea. It's only a 4-minute video. And Laniakea is the Hawaiian word for splendid heavens. And I'm sorry, a question just popped up and it distracted me for a minute. Laniakea is the name the astronomers in Hawaii gave to their construction of a map of the galactic clusters in our neighborhood. And the bottom line is, when you look at this map, it's humbling and awesome in that it's about 200 million light years across, and every point on it is a galaxy in the galactic cluster, 100 million of them, and way out at the end of a tendril is a dot, and that dot is not our solar system, it's the Milky Way. It's our entire galaxy, which until 75 years or so ago, we mistakenly, in our ignorance, thought was the entire universe, until we began to discover, through use of neutron stars and other vehicles, that there were these important clusters external to the Milky Way. That wasn't that long ago. So it's impossible not to be humbled by that, and also to just know in a visceral way that life can happen, life will happen. And so the likelihood that we're the top of the food chain, or the only apple of God's eye, if we're an apple of God's eye, then there are a lot of apples on the tree. And as a parent, I know I love all of my children equally. And I would guess that would be true for ultimate realities as well. The life that permeates this universe, what dawns on us is it's beyond our ability to grasp the extraordinary complexity and immensity, only a little bit of which has impinged upon us by manifesting technologies and humanoid forms that call us into account for our arrogance and thinking that this planet is the sole repository of life and intelligence. Good heavens, it was about 100 years ago that we first got electric lights. And we turned night into day with profound changes. Well, that's where technologies transform everything about us when they emerge. And that's why we have pursued, as any sensible person would expect us to, the technologies that are manifest on UFO encounters, and call us to a different way of understanding physics and propulsion and so many of the aspects of the universe that we once thought we understood, obviously not as well as we did. So UFOs are a real profound challenge, but I have no doubt that research into alloys, into propulsion systems, into physics has been stimulated by the reality of what we encountered, or at least ought to have been. And that's where we get into problems, because it's going to be taking place in the dark as far as most of us are concerned.
Absolutely, and I really want to get into that a little bit more when we get back from break, but I want to just ask you, because this is something I've thought about so much, but just about the gathering when you go to Mike Sword's and you're sitting there with all of these greats, and I know that he does that, once a year in Kalamazoo?
That's a different thing. That came out of the book. When the book was proposed, I was talking to Jan Aldrich on the phone, and he said, we're going to meet in Dallas. Why don't you join us? And that was one of the great moments of my life, as it turned out, because a group of us went to Dallas, La Quinta Hotel, really, high class, right? And decided to write the book. And the book took about 5 years to put together. And all of our work on it took place over the internet. As we sent everything back and forth, we didn't meet again until after the book was completed. And it was such a rich experience to spend the weekend in Kalamazoo discussing the subject seriously that now Mike, God bless him, has hosted semi-annual gatherings and invited an expanding group of people who have been working on this subject so seriously. We hope it can continue. Yeah, it's rich, wonderful conversations at those weekends.
And I've heard about that, and I can only hope that one of these days I would be so privileged to be there, because I just feel I have so much respect for all of these people. And we're really at a time where some of the older people in the field are unfortunately passing away, and we've got a younger generation that we have to get information, get these archives out to preserve history. And so, Barry Greenwood and I talk about this all the time. How are we going to do this? How are we going to make this transition? And how are we going to make sure that this information isn't lost? And I think that's really important. And I honor AFU. I honor Barry, Jan, Fran Ridge, all of these people who have restored files, scanned files, and made sure that they will be preserved for the sake of humanity.
Absolutely. And we are doing that. Tens of thousands of files have already been scanned into archives. The difficulty for a researcher is that it's the immensity of the data. And so much of the data has found its way into the archives over the years without being vetted. So when you pursue a humanoid catalog, for example, or physical effects catalog, you get story after story after story. The challenge becomes, what does that tell us? Because I'm convinced that when the decision was made in the 50s to begin seriously debunking and tamping down public fascination with the subject, that one of the reasons was because, as a rule, they didn't need more data about how UFOs flew. We cite in our book a speech given in the 1950s by Hermann Oberth, the father of German rocketry and mentor to Hermann von Braun. And he talked about the characteristics of UFOs, their maneuvers, and the change of color as the ionization of nitrogen and other elements in the atmosphere in reaction to the intensity of the powertrain is accelerated. He did science with it, and he said, look, if I had 2 or 3 reports, I wouldn't be saying this. He said, but I have tens of reports, all from U.S. Navy and Air Force jets or planes with radar who have documented this phenomena and given me this data. And that's back in the 50s. They didn't need Antilli to write in or call in and say, I saw a glowing object, or a glowing object landed on the road and my car stopped. You don't need 500 cases like that to know that that's one of the effects. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons they didn't care inordinately about more reports from the public is because they had data they're working on. And if they knew what that data meant, we would probably, I guess, be further along in understanding what was taking place than we are. But much of that data is out here in the public domain. It has been since the 40s and 50s, and we have thousands and thousands of reports, and yet we're accumulating more and more and more reports without vetting them.
Right.
You know, organizations like MUFON collect, just collect and amass,
right,
and have the efforts to do serious science through that organization have been abortive. I once said to John Schuessler when he was heading it, I said, you know, if MUFON were a disinformation organization on behalf of the government, you couldn't do a better job of making the subject look ridiculous and the people who pursue it look like they don't know what they're doing, because so much of the output, and all you have to do is look at what is spoken about at the conferences and who are some of the people that are invited to say damn near anything that they want to say. Some are good, some are so-so, and some are just meaningless. And as long as you've got that, it reminds me that propaganda consists not of lies, but of truth and half-truth and lies, spliced together artfully so that you wind up not knowing what is true.
Right.
And that shuts you down as an intellectual being.
And thank you for saying that. I mean, I think that, you know, Robert Powell, I mean, there's so many people that have exited MUFON just because of that, because they want to do good work. And then you've got the secret space program and some of these things, people in the organization who have credentials that can't be verified. I mean, there's so many things, and it really does minimalize the subject. And it to me, and I've thought this for a long time, it like you said, you wouldn't need to have any disinformation because that would be it.
Right. That's right.
And that's so interesting. We're going to get ready to go to break. I have no doubt that the next hour is going to be even better than this. I'm here with Richard Thieme, and you can go to themeworks.com to learn about all of his books, specifically Mind Games, which is a unique collection of 19 stories of alternate realities, computer hackers, deception, intelligence, and that sounds pretty good to me. We will be right back. Stick around. The best is yet to come.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. Next Friday, I will be here honoring Elaine Douglas. Mike Cleland will be here, who was a friend of Elaine. I'm also bringing in a few other people that worked with her while she was alive. Elaine Douglas was the former Utah MUFON state director who passed away of cancer, unfortunately, but did a tremendous amount of work with regard to abduction research and also looking into MUFON and some of their questionable practices as a non-for-profit. So this will be a great memorial for her. I hope, as somebody who took over for her as the MUFON state director and then resigned, that I can carry on what she was looking into. I know I will, and also try to preserve her memory. I want to just say before I get back to our guest tonight that it is important that we preserve history, and Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich, Fran Ridge, Mike Swords, Klaas Vaughn, all of these people have done so much to obtain files from researchers who either want nothing to do with the subject anymore, from families who have files, from people who have passed away that are getting ready to throw them in the trash. They have gone in there at the last minute, pulled those files out, and made sure that they don't fall into oblivion. And this is important. We have to preserve the subject, good, bad, and all of the above, because this is an important history. And 100 years from now, we're going to look back at this and we either won't have information or we will, but we will do our best to make sure that we do. What happened with the Elaine Douglas files is something that it breaks my heart. And again, I say we need to shine a light on organizations like MUFON, who are non-for-profits, who should be operating above board, but are clearly not. And I'll talk about that next week a little bit more. But tonight I am here with someone who I have followed for a long time. He is a brilliant human being. Richard Thieme is a pioneer prophet of the science, technology. He is somebody who has been at DEF CON for 23 years in a row, and that is a huge feat. He has lectured for the NSA, the FBI. He contributed to one of my favorite books, and is a book that I think each of you who cares about this subject should get, which is UFOs and Government Historical Inquiry. We've had so much to talk about before the break, but Richard, welcome back. This is such a cool conversation for me. Thank you.
Thanks. So many directions we can go, Erica.
I know. Well, I know, and I might have to have you back a few more times. But I know that Amy has a question, and we will get to that. And I know that we've got someone who will be calling in, but I wanted to go down the whole of we've got, obviously, in the United States, around the world, we've got contractors who have a vested interest in getting a hold of technology. And so I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on that? And when did we start to see, we look back at some of the files that were disclosed, Project Artichoke, some of these things where we were definitely experimenting on humans, perhaps without their knowledge. What are your thoughts with regard to that and ufology? How do they intersect?
Well, I've never linked them in exactly that way, so let me try to talk my way toward a meaningful answer to that question. For those who aren't familiar with it, Artichoke, Bluebird, MK Ultra were all code names referring to experiments we did in mind control. And there's a remarkable historical narrative there, which leads toward the book Mind Games, which you mentioned. So let me get right to that. We were attempting to learn techniques of brainwashing because people became very alarmed during the Korean War when our service personnel would turn on the United States and say all sorts of things. And we became convinced that the Russians and the Chinese had techniques of brainwashing about which we did not know, that they were using arcane and advanced scientific and technological means to program people. And the word brainwashing came into being, actually. There were a couple of articles about it written by a journalist in the 1950s, and it was very alarming. And we wanted to know what they were doing in order to duplicate it or counter it, because the Cold War was going on in earnest. And so we set up secret experiments. People were experimented on without their consent. One of the only reasons we know about MKUltra and the like is because when the order was given by the director of the CIA to destroy all of the data about those programs, they overlooked a box of, I believe it was about 50,000 financial documents hidden in a storehouse. You know, the Indiana Jones movie, when they put the box in the storehouse at the end. Well, those warehouses do exist. And someone got a hold of those financial documents through the Freedom of Information Act and pieced it together and discovered what we had done. These were horrific experiments overseen by a gentleman named Cameron, who was the head of the American and the Canadian Psychiatric Institutes, associations. And a lot of the work was done in Montreal so that we did have plausible deniability of the CIA conducting it. Well, the story of brainwashing got turned into a novel, The Manchurian Candidate, which has been made into a movie several times. And techniques for turning people through torture became encoded in a manual we developed called the Kubark Manual, which we used to train our own personnel to withstand torture, but which, when we made the decision to torture people again in the Iraq War after 9/11, was then used in turn not to train our people to protect themselves from torture or to endure it, but to torture others. Now, here's the kicker, and this narrative is a cornerstone of my talk called Fiction is the Only Way to Tell the Truth, Life in the National Security State. When you go all the way back to those initial articles about brainwashing, the journalist was in fact a covert CIA agent. And there was no brainwashing. There was nothing unusual about what the Chinese and the Russians were doing. The one used the Chinese more sophisticated methods of turning people. The Russians were brutal and beat the hell out of people. If there wasn't anything secretive about their methods, and there was no such thing as brainwashing as a discrete, arcane activity. But it was turned into fiction and then, as I said, turned back into fact by us in an effort to do that which we had never discovered data for anyone else doing in the first place. And that's the kind of twisted trajectory that the national security state really has caused. Plausible deniability. Eisenhower was the great father of it. He had people who he used like C.D. Jackson or Eddie Bernays, who he used when we did covert activity and overthrew the responsible people in Iran and then in Guatemala. The national security state has been a kind of nightmare maze of our own creation because it becomes a challenge to know what's real and what is not real. And that pointed toward my book, Mind Games. Why did I go back to fiction? I had written a nonfiction series of essays over a number of years that were collected by Elsevier, the publisher, and Islands in the Clickstream is the name of the book. It's out of print, but you can still get it in electronic form, or from Amazon in edited version that I produced. But I was working with people in the intelligence community after 9/11 on ethical issues. We were attempting to understand how the ethical norms of the past could be restated or reinterpreted to have any meaning whatsoever, given what the technologies had done to our practice and what that meant even for religions and spirituality. And so we spent a couple of years, there were about a dozen of us, mostly from NSA, one or two CIA, some independents, puzzling through this and producing a document which was then brought into NSA as hopefully a guideline which had virtually no efficacy or potency whatsoever. But the conversations were detailed and in-depth. And at one point, a assistant deputy director of the National Security Agency said, of course, you can't discuss some of the things we talk about in here. And I said, I know that. And then his eyes kind of twinkled, and he said, well, unless you start writing fiction. Fiction is the only way you can tell the truth now. Now, he wasn't kidding. So I start writing short stories, 35 of which have been published, and 19 were collected in the volume you mentioned, Mind Games. And I've written a novel called Foam, which is full of lore about the paranormal and remote viewing. And it's multiple narratives, but one is an alien who comes to Earth to do improv because we're the funniest and the sexiest species they've been able to locate. So my fiction is the way I can tell the truth. And here's an example of that. I wrote one of the stories in Mind Games is called Break Memory, and it's how the masters of society manage and manipulate memories so that the narratives they want to be believed are believed. And it's a tale in one of the tales the masters tells is, I have a story called 0 Day Roswell, which is a dying intelligence agent. And he says, let me tell you what we're doing. And he meant what we're doing in surveillance and intrusion. And this was long before it was public knowledge that such practices were implemented. And there's a long, long, long list of things that he said they were doing. Well, 6 years after the story was published, Edward Snowden revealed a number of those practices in a very different way. And somebody noticed the similarity and took a photograph of a page from my story and tweeted it with a link to Edward Snowden and said, line these up and take a look. And a lot of the things I had said, Snowden said, but I put it in a short story. And so I'm free to live as I like.
That is a good thing. That's a good thing.
And entertainment is the mind candy that gets ideas and narratives into the mind of society without people realizing that what they're taking, because the sugar helps the medicine go down. And a Hollywood director said, if you want to really communicate, you do it through a movie. You can do it through books, but these days it's movies or other fictional narratives, because your mind on movies doesn't distinguish from the experience on the screen as opposed to the experience you have. It takes it in, and you can frame and formulate belief systems by promulgating them again and again through repetition. And one good example of that is what's done with UFOs. Good friend who taught cover and deception at the agency said there are 3 legs to the stool of cover and deception: illusion, misdirection, and ridicule. And he said ridicule is the best. There are famous lawyers who teach seminars in how to ridicule a witness so that you can totally undermine the credibility of someone whose testimony is valid, is authentic, but is made to seem spurious. Illusion means, quite simply, the wholesale creation of what we call event scenes, narratives, constructions of images of reality which are so real that people believe them. And this has been going on for a long, long time. This wasn't invented with social media. Social media is just one of the latest instantiations in which false narratives are successfully promulgated.
And I have to ask you, because this misdirection, illusion, red herrings, I mean, when you look at things like Area 51, when you look at some of these perhaps myths that have been constructed? I mean, are they myths? Are they diversionary tactics? What is your take?
Well, I don't want to lump all things together as if they're all one thing. Diversionary tactics are used. Misdirection means don't look here, look over here. Area 51, my guess is, and it's only a guess, I've talked to people who have worked there. This is certainly a place where research into the Blackbird, the U-2, and other arcane flying technologies have taken place. Area 51 is real, and research has taken place there. And I have been told by a friend at CIA that if I know about a technology, the likelihood is it's existed for 20 years. That by the time I knew about stealth technology, for example, it had been flying for some time and denied for some time. So it's in order to understand what's real, you have to deconstruct the narrative by doing historical research into who said it, where did it come from. You know, on the internet, if something's repeated 100 times, people think that's 100 sources instead of just one source. One source writes a narrative and distributes it in 100 different ways. And so do we. All counterintelligence, intelligence operations are savvy about how to use and manipulate the media. If you go back, as I said, to how Eisenhower chose to wage total Cold War using psychological operations, which he had learned during World War II, were so valuable, you will see that this is not something that just sprang into being with the internet. It's been tried and true in the national security state for some time. So when, for example, we talk about, someone asked me about Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, and what I thought of it, and I said, what I think of it is that he's told some stories for which there is no corroboration, no data, no footnotes, no evidence. Our historical work that you mentioned, UFOs and Government, has 1,000 footnotes. And that means you can trace every single thing that's asserted in that book to a government document or other primary source. When people say, a la Corso, well, how much of our technologies have been developed by back formation, reverse engineering of technologies was observed or deconstructed from crashed vehicles? The only answer I can give is I have no idea. But when we talk about it in our group, what we do agree is that in order to trace the provenance of the immersion of, for example, fiber optics or the internet or transistors, you have to really know the history of science. You have to know what was being done at Bell Labs. You have to know what contracts were let. You have to know what dark contracts were let. You have to know what the black budget was. We don't know those things.
I know. And I've got, and I think this is so interesting, but I've got Libertas, who's been on the phone, and he wants to ask you a question. I know we're getting ready to go to break, but Lib, just ask away, and we'll get to this now and then after the break.
Hello, Richard.
You're a patient man, too.
Hi.
Yeah, I don't know if it's bad karma to be brought in after the MK Ultra discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they did a lot of that at McGill University in Montreal.
Right.
But I think, Richard, that a lot of us seem to forget that laws were put in place and the reasons that they were put in place. And it's my personal opinion that many of the laws were put in place because they realized that UFOs are real and they recovered them. You know, if you start at the time of the Battle of L.A., and then Roswell, and 2 months after Roswell, what happened was the National Security Act. Within several years, they did the Invention Secrecy Act, and I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I can't hear you, so I don't know if you're listening or not. And
I'm listening, yeah.
The Invention Security Act, that's how they prevent new technology from reaching the market. And most people in ufology are not familiar with it, by the way. I don't know if you are. And then 51 was Operation Mockingbird. So the narrative is that they control things. And then, of course, I had to chuckle when you brought up Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda, and even Eisenhower using propaganda. Of course, he was the one that warned us about the military-industrial complex. And ufology people want to revere Forrestal, but he actually helped the proliferation of the military-industrial complex. But I did want to ask, have you spoken to any of the spooks or the Alphabet Agency folks at DEF CON regarding UFOs?
Sure.
And what do they say? Sure, you sound like you don't want to tell us.
Well, no, but it's the kind of question. I understand why you would ask it, but I'd have to take the question apart. When you say the spooks at DEF CON, in the old days, they used to play a game at DEF CON called Spot the Fed. And if a Fed was there undercover and you spotted him and outed him, you got a shirt. And the Fed had to wear a shirt that said, I was spotted. Well, I made the observation some years ago that we no longer played Spot the Fed, we played Spot the Hacker, because everybody was a Fed. I've been doing a series of talks for the last 2 years that are, one of the title was Playing Through the Pain, the Impact of Dark Knowledge on Security and Intelligence Professionals. And when I decided to do this, it was because I've been speaking and writing full-time for 25 years and have developed a lot of collegial relationships. And I wrote to colleagues and said, I want to address this because I'm listening to so many people tell me what it does to them.
Oh, no, and I'm so sorry. I've got to cut you off right there.
We'll come back to it.
We will be right back. I'm Erica Lukes here with Richard Thieme and Libertas. Stick around. The best is yet to come.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hi, this is Tim Swartz with Exploring the Bizarre, and I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. May the glorious message of peace and love fill you with joy during this wonderful season.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
It's great. I think it's great. It's great.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Please make a note of it. It's great.
If ever a breed was affectionate to a fault, it's the Golden Retriever. They're people dogs, pure and simple. And the Golden Retriever Rescue of Southern Nevada needs your help. If you would like to volunteer, foster, adopt, or donate, go to the Golden Retriever Rescue of Southern Nevada's website at grrsn.org. That's grrsn.org. Or call 598-GOLD. That's 598-GOLD.
Gee, it's so quiet. Too quiet. Terribly quiet. Awfully quiet.
Do you have an hour to kill? Well, crank up those EVPs, spirit boxes, and walk the haunted halls of the unknown with UK's very own paranormal investigator, David Cook.
You guys ready for this?
The Ghostly Hour, live Sunday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern.
And now you're mine.
Come hear first-hand accounts of some of the most famous ghost sightings, photos, and videos from around the world. Skeptics, believers, and spirits both good and bad. Welcome to the Ghostly Hour, hosted by David Cook. Live every Sunday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It's Britney, bitch.
No, it's Jessica Johns, a.k.a. your favorite Britney fan from Reality Check, wishing you and yours a very Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back, and this has been one of my favorite shows. For a long, long time, I've wanted to get Richard Thieme on because I knew that his work was just important for a multitude of reasons. He is not only knowledgeable in the UFO subject, but in intelligence, misinformation, disinformation, all of these things. And I am very grateful that he's here. You can go get his book at It's Mind Games, and you can go to themeworks.com. He has other books, one of which I've recommended and I've got here, UFOs and Government, Historical Inquiry. Some of my friends and people that have been on the show also contributed to that book. It is wonderful. And when we're looking for good knowledge, we're looking for dedicated people who don't have an agenda. They want the facts out there. You couldn't ask for somebody that is better to do that. So I am grateful to have Richard Thieme here tonight. And Lib, who is a faithful listener, was asking a question before the break. And I want you to be able to kind of wrap that question up. So please continue.
Well, his question was, have you spoken to spooks at DEF CON? And I just want to remind him there are 16 known agencies or organizational structures conducting intelligence. You can rattle off a lot of the names. It's not just the ones that everybody knows. And then there are many others carrying it out. And, of course, there are many private organizational intelligence and counterintelligence operations going on as well. So, yeah, I've talked to people. Some have become friends. When I gave a talk about the reality of UFOs called UFO 101 at DEF CON, before I did the talk on the book, somebody from DOD, and DOD is a euphemism that covers all of those different agencies, gave me a challenge coin afterward. A challenge coin is what we use in military or whatever circles to say thank you and acknowledge someone for what they contributed without giving you a tip. I mean, without money. So certain challenge coins are important. My very first one came from the Assistant Secretary of Defense when I mediated a conversation between 4 high-level feds and 1,000 hackers at DEF CON, and managed to cancel out some of the most negative things that might have happened in that exchange had I not mediated it. So I've known I've known people at the CIA, and he gave me a challenge coin because he said, you're bringing out something that's important for people to know. And then as we talked, though, this is critical. He said, I've seen a file that somebody and he named somebody at one of the agencies, kept privately. Now, this is a person to whom people often went for classes of one sort or another. And if he knew they were present at a certain UFO event, a military base or whatever, he would ask them about it and get the details of what had really happened, and found out how cover-ups were effectively managed. And there were often cover-ups. But from what he was describing, I said, do you mean so-and-so? And he said, yes. Do you know so-and-so? Okay, so here's a case of where we both are citing information based on the quasi-secret file of the same person. And so it's not 3 people with data. It's 1 person with data of a selected sort. And he did what so many of us have done. 40 years ago, when I had that conversation with Bob Reed, I decided I was going to use my position as a clergyman, and then for the last 25 years as a trusted colleague of people all over the world in these different domains, to learn what I could from the best people. I was a MUFON, whatever it was, for a while in Wisconsin. I did that simply because I wanted to interview people and learn from them. So I've talked to people all over the world and different people in other countries about the things we're talking about. And so the answer is yes, but there's no one plan. There's just a phenomenon, which we call UFOs, which we know is real.
Absolutely.
Which has manifested itself unmistakably, and which, as a general, according to Jenny Randles, said to Alan Hynek in the 1980s, Alan, do you really think we would ignore something like this? Of course not. You go all the way back to 1947, and the general saying, this is something real and not visionary or fictitious. They knew early on it was real. The question was not, is it real? It's what threat does it pose to national security, and what should we do about it in terms of appropriate avenues of research using the cloaks we have under black operations.
And I've got some really important questions that I want to get in. And Libertas, thank you so much for calling in. You are awesome, and I will definitely email you in a little bit. But I've got to ask these questions since I've got Richard on the line here.
Taking the call,
thank you,
Erica.
absolutely.
And I know where to get good information. Call just before the news hour. And then we talk during the break, and I get the good
I know,
bread.
you're so good.
But
I love it.
Sneak in that it isn't just information they're protecting. They're protecting fossil fuels because they know they don't run on coal and gasoline. So thanks for taking my call. Have a good night.
Thank you.
It was nice to talk to you, Richard. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that cynical view of the oil and gas industry
absolutely
as well. But we don't have to go there now.
And so what I want to ask you is, we look at ufology and there are a lot of conspiracy theories that go along with ufology. When you look at the infiltration of the community, why would you think the community would be infiltrated? I think there are a multitude of reasons, but what are your thoughts?
Well, that's the first thing that occurred to me is, there are a multitude of reasons. And it changes as the context changes. And one of the things we humans try to do is control and manage, often imperfectly. We can't control the UFO phenomenon. We can control the narrative about it. And that's where the ridicule, that third leg of the stool, has been so important. Ridicule has been remarkably effective in shutting down pilots or astronauts or other people who have stories to tell. And I've given maybe 50 talks based on the UFO and Government book, and almost every time someone stands up at the end and says, I've never told this to anybody, but I want to tell you what happened to me, and I want you to know I'm not crazy, and I wasn't drinking, and I'm not a drunk. And it's so effective. I don't know any other subject where someone gets up and says, I want you to know I'm not crazy and I'm not a drunk, except that being crazy or drunk has been so promulgated as what must be true of someone who had an anomalous encounter, that people have internalized it, and they speak of it almost as if they are ashamed of disclosing this, like victims of abuse internalize the experience as if they somehow caused it and they ought to be ashamed. And it was Robert Powell who, when he listened to my talk on the impact of dark knowledge, the traumatic impact, he said, this is absolutely true of UFO experiencers as well, except that it's not a non-disclosure agreement that keeps them from talking. It's the taboo, which has been so effectively promulgated. So one reason is to make sure you control the narrative. Make sure you inflect it. I coined the phrase 20 years ago, real birds in digital cages, where people, you talk about conspiracy theories, which are simply connecting too few dots too quickly in order to calm your anxiety and believe you have a narrative which you can understand, which explains something. And sometimes it serves people who don't want the truth out for a variety of reasons to just keep those rolling. But also for social experiments, UFO communities in the early days, in the 50s and the 60s, were growing in notoriety and strength and power. And you didn't want a group to have political power or potentially have political power without doing something about it. And you know what the FBI did in the 70s with COINTELPRO, how it infiltrated all of the anti-war groups in order to be able to affect what they actually did. Some of the violence came out of infiltrators who promulgated violence in order to have a pushback. There are multiple reasons you would promulgate lies in the UFO community and also want to be in a position of influence in the social construction of reality, which binds these people together so that the threat can be undermined. And it was actually after one of the Bilderberg conferences in the late 70s that someone came out and said, with all the riots that were going on in the streets after Vietnam and the assassinations, he said, we must never allow the excesses of democracy to get to this level again. And do you know no war has ever been covered on television again? Vietnam was on TV, and it powerfully affected us to see those images every day and realize what lies were being promulgated about the war at the cost of a million lives. It was horrific. Well, the response was not to say we must not kill thousands of civilians again. The response was to say we must control the narrative and do so by not allowing this kind of coverage up close and up front. And you don't see it in Afghanistan, you don't see it in Iraq, and you don't see it in any of the 150 or so countries in which we have a covert presence through our special operations of one kind or another. So knowing that, you are very apprehensive about, or should be, about what you believe. Lib was saying that he speaks about this and that and is worried about intrusion and surveillance. And my response to that is until it becomes actionable, speech is not an issue. In fact, it proves how wonderful it is that we have free speech. So speech is a bleeder valve for so much. But when it becomes actionable, you become a threat. And I was using the example of Martin Luther King Jr. Right. If he had stayed in the pulpit in Atlanta, Georgia, and said whatever he wanted to say and nothing happened as a result, which is true of most sermons, most Sundays, in most places, he wouldn't have been targeted. But right. He became actionable, and people hit the streets, and he became a political power and force, And that's when J. Edgar Hoover made sure he bugged and infiltrated and did everything he could, try to drive him to suicide and try to undermine his effectiveness, because J. Edgar Hoover hated what he was doing and brought the full force of the FBI against him covertly to do that.
So let me ask you, has that taken place in the history of ufology? I mean, I look at James McDonald. I mean, I look at there are a few key people that bucked the system, that went against the grain, and they had untimely deaths. Could there be some correlation with that? Would there be certain rogue factions inside the government that would want to make sure that that information is out and use any means possible?
I think that's a good example of connecting the dots a little prematurely, because it's correlation, not causation. Gary Webb was someone I knew and respected, and in a nutshell, he outed a relationship between CIA and crack cocaine in a series of articles that resulted in his career being destroyed. And a number of years later, when he couldn't get a job anymore, even though he's a Pulitzer Prize winner, because they had savaged his reputation, he killed himself. And people said to me, "Don't you think the CIA killed him?" Well, by the time he killed himself, he had lost his career, he'd lost his wife, his life was a ruin, and one thing led to another. When your motive for living is taken away from you, you don't need to send some assassin, Hollywood style, to take you out. Taking down his effectiveness was important. And 10 years later, when the CIA said, well, yeah, some of that was true, there's no accountability. You can acknowledge it so long as there's sufficient passage of time between what you did and anyone who would ever be held accountable for it. So when you look at James McDonald, yes, he killed himself, but he was also, like Gary, struggling with depression his whole life. And he was ridiculed. You know that when he spoke before a congressional committee, he was about atmospherics, because he was an atmospheric physicist. He was ridiculed as being something about little green men, and everybody laughs. Illusion, misdirection, and ridicule, the greatest of these is ridicule. You diminished his effectiveness despite the hard science he brought to the subject to such a degree that you didn't need to send somebody to kill him. You rendered him ineffective. You neutralized him. And that's always going to be, these days, much easier to do than killing somebody.
And so tell me how you would do this. Like now, I mean, we've got obviously social media, which is a great thing. But when you look at this subject, I'm still dealing with some of the old school people who don't understand that this subject is still being manipulated. So tell us some things to look for.
Well, the easiest way to neutralize someone is, like I mentioned, I've given about 50 talks, including for the Ryerson Astronomical Society at the University of Chicago, for the Adler Planetarium Astronomical Society in Chicago, and libraries and forums all over. And that's and I've done a 4-week class on it for the Lifelong Learning Center here in Minneapolis, and it was such a hit. So many people turned out because they want to know about it. And as I said, they often stand up. Hynek said he thought we only heard about 10%, and we've revised that to maybe 1%, because so many individual people come forward and tell us quietly what they experienced at some point in the past. And people say to me, they said last week, boy, you better watch your back. Don't you think you're a danger to the government? And I said, no, because I'm just this schmuck talking about stuff. And what does that matter? It hasn't become actionable. So people say, well, what have you heard from the government? Because that book is gold. It's 600 pages describing how the government responded to UFO phenomena from the 1940s to the 1980s. And everything is documented. It's history. And it was recommended for inclusion in every single university library as a result of its real bulletproof data. And people say, well, what has the government said? And then I say, do you want to hear what they say to me? And they say, yes. And I stand there saying nothing until they get the joke. It's so much easier to ignore me. You can say nice things about me, but certain doors haven't opened. Certain opportunities have not presented themselves. Is it paranoid to think that some of that may be because people don't want them to happen? Or, as more likely, certain opportunities would have manifested themselves if somebody did want them to happen. So you can't prove a negative, but you can say that certain opportunities did not take place, which might have made some of the works we've produced or my own fiction as much a part of the bestseller list as what we call shovelware, which publishers keep shoveling out. Or it just may not be good enough. You don't know. And when you don't know, it's better to remain agnostic rather than turn atheist and think you do know. There are so many narratives, so many social collectives saying different things about UFOs that it's the problem is not how do you discredit. You just make sure it doesn't get treated as a subject with respect. The same way the snail darter is treated when scientists want to examine the habitat of the snail darter. That's a respectable thing. It's rejected because all of the stories we have, the thousands, are rejected as anecdotes. Well, what is science but taking anecdotes and making of them a case study? Once it's published in a journal, it's a case study. Anecdotes collected are a case study. But as long as you can dismiss them as anecdotes and don't have respectable journals, there have been few respectable journalist accounts, but no respectable journals exploring the multifaceted thing that we call ufology. There is, in fact, Erica, no ufology. There's no scientific, organized, principled, accepted standards of anything like a science of ufology.
You're not kidding about that. And that's unfortunate. I mean, because there's so many good people that have dedicated their lives to researching this. And I always tell my listeners, go outside of the United States because they've done tremendous work and they don't have all of this, the smoke and mirrors that we do here in the United States.
Right. And if you look at what we call ufology, it includes so many sciences and social sciences, right? It's material science, and it's physics, and it's chemistry, and it's sociology, and it's psychology, and it's anthropology, and on and on. Every one of those respectable disciplines could be an avenue to exploring some aspect. And you know what Peter Sturrock has endured, trying to raise the issue for respectable investigation by fellow physicists. And the response is, as one of them said, well, he's past his prime, you know. It's just kind of implying that he's in his dotage and is half demented to suggest we take seriously the paranormal and ufology. And yet nothing could be more solidly demonstrated by historical and anecdotal evidence than telepathy, clairvoyance. That's a whole other subject, but I've explored remote viewing with the people who have done it and brought it to CIA and NSA.
And there's so Kit Green and Hal Puthoff, and I didn't get to ask you about them, yes, so I'm sure that
I know Hal Puthoff well, and Kit Green, who brought it to CIA, and Hal brought it from SRI into NSA after Ingo Swann woke him up to what some of the capacities of mind might be. And I've talked to people who did remote viewing. I have a wonderful interview on my website with Joe McMoneagle about remote viewing. It's I think one of the best things I've ever done, because he was so up for discussing the issues of UFOs and remote viewing at one of the highest intellectual levels. You can go to Thieme. Themeworks.
At themeworks.com, absolutely. And I will post that and keep posting that on all of my social media channels and my website, because I think your work is so important on multiple levels. And I have to have you back
Well, it's a pleasure. It's great to talk to you.
Absolutely. And it is fun that you have this Utah connection. That makes me, and Father Walt, that will always just make me smile. Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I'd known when I was in Provo that you were around. I didn't make the connection. I didn't have a lot of time, but it would have been great to, go to one of the many coffee shops that now exist in Utah.
Well, we'll have to do that next time. Hopefully you and your wife get back here. That'd be fun. And thank you very, very much for being here. Richard Thieme he's a guru, and you can go visit his website at themeworks.com. He has a wonderful book, Mind Games. You can get that foam. There are UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry. One of my favorites. This is probably my top 5. So great work. Thank you, Richard, for being here. I want to tell all of you, thank you for supporting the show. Get information out next week. I will be doing a memorial show for Elaine Douglas, because unfortunately her work will be forever lost. And that is most unfortunate when someone dedicates 25 years of their life to trying to investigate a subject and doing the right thing. Stick around, because Willie Miranda will be up next. Be safe, and I will catch you next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack